Welcome to Black in Focus. I'm Karen Toulon here in New York, and today we're talking about foundations and funding and support for trans girls of color. We're joined by Monique Marsh. She's the president and CEO of Grantmakers for Girls of Color, and by Bré Rivera, program fellow at Groundswell Black Trans Fund. They're both the co-leads of Holding a Sister. Now, according to Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, Americans gave $428 billion in 2018, some best recent data. But according to a report by the LGBTQ Issues Foundation, funding for LGBTQ causes totaled about $209 million in 2018. That is up, but still that's only 28 cents on every $100 given to foundations. And then funding for the trans community in the U.S. also reached a record high of $28 million in 2018, a 27% increase from 2017.
The Holding a Sister initiative is a partnership between Grantmakers for Girls of Color and the Black Trans Fund to respond to the fact that there's currently no funding that has been moving explicitly to support young trans girls and femmes of color or gender expansive youth of color. So this initiative is designed for us to mobilize resources and support organizations that are already doing significant work within trans and gender expansive communities to deepen that work and directly support it. The initiative is something that we expect will move about $1 million in our first year. And it will be jointly run, as I mentioned, between our two organizations, the Black Trans Fund and Grantmakers for Girls of Color. But we're joining a funding community that has been looking at how to better resource the needs in our communities of color. The Black Trans Fund, Third Wave Fund, Black Trans Travel Fund, and the Fund for Trans Generations. So what you described around a partnership is really what we want to emphasize here.
There is a misconception that Black cis and trans women can't work together, and that's not true. And so we are modeling what that looks like in a healthy way. And then also, I think for young people in general, we have done a disservice to our young folks and not believing them, supporting them, and actually giving them resources to transform the world. And so this partnership not only ensures that young girls of color are seen and could move the way that they need to in the world in order to be their true and full selves, but we are also really thinking deeply about the research and the narratives that are needed in order to show that communities are working together more than they ever have been before, and will highlight a lot of the intersectional work that is happening in cis communities and trans communities that help us achieve liberation.
You've had some high-level support from some interesting people. Mackenzie Scott supported Grantmakers during her first round of giving. Pivotal Ventures, which is the investment company founded by Melinda French Gates, is also a supporter.
What I believe organizations and other donors are responding to when they trust G4GC, specifically with the grants that you just elevated, is that they understand that we are committed to participatory processes that will center the decision-making of those who are most directly impacted by the conditions that we're seeking to shift. So by that, I mean, we are not coming from as an external body to have conversations about how to robustly resource girls of color. What we're doing is entering into a partnership with communities, with young folks to say, tell us what you need.
Do you feel that there's enough diversity within just the world of philanthropy?
Yes and no. Black Trans Fund exists, Grantmakers for Girls of Color exist, Third Wave. We are starting to see a shift where funds are not only centering the experiences of trans folks, but actually hiring and investing in those communities. I do also recognize that there has not been the same amount of giving to trans gender expansive communities as to other communities. And I think it speaks particularly to the lack of support for Black and Brown communities. We've historically received low levels of support from philanthropy for years. And so I am hopeful that Grantmakers for Girls of Color, Black Trans Fund is actually paving the way and making space for a future that is full of strong, competent trans leaders who can then be able to make decisions based on what's going on in the communities that they come from.
You mentioned what's going on in the communities. We have to talk about all of the legislation across the U.S., hundreds of bills. Some have already been passed. Some are sitting on governors' desks.
Traditionally, there has been a lack of support for community care efforts being led by trans, gender nonconforming, gender expansive led organizations in the country. We've been told for years that our work was too risky, couldn't be tracked. Why do trans communities particularly feel like we deserve more? But also just really naming that there is like rampant job discrimination and criminalization of Black and brown bodies, trans bodies, that don't allow us to actually get a foothold in this country. And so, yes, I do feel like there has been a strong investment in legislation, state work, but BTF funds communities from a place of joy because we understand that trans communities have been doing this work on behalf of like getting equal protections for years and have not seen the needle move. And so there is an investment that we need to make in making sure that people are housed and fed and have access to adequate health care. And I would like to see a world where we have an equal investment of communities and in communities, right? For the people on the ground, and also an equal investment in the state. We're not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so really excited that there are funds who are now like shifting to more community care, mutual aid offerings, especially during a pandemic. We've seen that a lot of the work from smaller, scrappier grassroots organizations have actually helped prevent an economic collapse.
When the pandemic sort of became a reality in our world, at Grantmakers for Girls of Color, we were very clear that many of our most marginalized communities would be impacted the greatest. We were also clear that most of those most impacted communities would be absent from the dominant narrative about who was suffering from the pandemic.
For the grants, about $1 million you are going to hand out this year, what are the top priorities? Where do you think that those monies will go?
It's our intention to hire. We're currently hiring a fund manager for the Holding a Sister initiative. We know that there are significant health crises impacting trans girls of color. We know that there are educational disparities that impact them. Bree has already elevated the criminalization that we see so many of our young people experiencing. So obviously, as we start to look at what the priorities will be, we'll likely respond to some of these, I would say, outcomes of structural oppressions. But we also really want to be clear that the Holding a Sister initiative is also about being radical in the sense that we want to invest in their joy, in their capacity to be, to live life and experience, a promise toward liberated futures.
Even in like my hardest moments when philanthropy is unkind and movement isn't supportive, it's really refreshing to be able to glean on all of the work that's happening within Black trans communities and being able to fund that at a high level.
Thanks to Monique Morris and Bré Rivera from Holding a Sister Fund. And that'll do it for this edition of Black in Focus. For Bloomberg and all of us here, we'll see you next week. Take care.